My name is Drew Patterson. I'm the General Manager of Treetime.ca. Today we're going to talk about legacy shelterbelts. Canada had one of the biggest baby boom populations of any of the Allied countries after World War II, and the changeover of farms from our parents' generation to our generation is one of the biggest ever. We're seeing a lot of people that are inheriting either their grandfathers or their parents' shelter belts, and they're not sure how to maintain it, how to prolong the life of it, and it may be out of disrepair because the planning wasn't there in the same way, or it wasn't passed along, or the reasoning behind it wasn't passed along. So just like with your shelter belts, number one comes down to planning or assessing. What do you have growing in your shelter belt? What is there? What is the lifespan of them? Can you renew some of those things? Because, newsflash, you can actually chop down a whole bunch of trees and they will regain their height and size in the next few years, and they'll be much healthier for doing that. Some things do not do that. Things like Siberian elm tend to grow, die in 20 years, 25 years, and they're gone, and they probably have a ton of other weed seedlings. We don't suggest that you plant some of those things back. You can make much better choices for filling that space for the future. And that's exactly it. If you have a plan or you want to transition your shelter belt to serve some differing needs for you and your generation, to customize it to your situation, then you need to do a little bit of research and think about it. And you also need to think too that it gets a little bit addictive. You start off with a couple of small changes. You love how they turned out. 2 or 3 years later, you're expanding what you're doing elsewhere. You have a little bit here, you're pushing there, you're pulling there, you're turning some things around, you're making it a little bit sparser over here, a little denser over here. You want to find a way to pull all the deer on the property that are eating some of your stuff elsewhere, so you're planting some bait type stuff like red-nose your dogwood to pull the moose or deer elsewhere. People do these things and they try to interrupt or steer them away from some of their regular pathways. And if you know your land really well, you often know that those things exist and how they react, and with a little bit of planning and reflection, you're much more likely to get your results. When you're doing your needs assessment of your shelter belt, you're going to find that there are some things where there are much better genetics now. When you take a look at a lot of the poplar varieties that were grown in the 50s and 60s, some of them might still be persisting. I know there is this terrible rumor that poplars only live for 15 to 25 years, and that is not true. A lot of the hybrid poplar varieties that were developed in Indian Head, Saskatchewan, under the PFRA program with Agriculture Canada, some of those can last 60, 70 years easily. All they need is a proper maintenance and care. And there's also a lot of different choices now. Back in your grandfather's age, the choices were big, huge dumps of the main trunk of the tree, and the branches weren't much smaller. So when you go in there to maintain that, because a branch dies or falls off, you're going to need a chainsaw and a truck. And good luck if you didn't plan ahead and you don't have the space. However, with new species like the Okanese poplar, you have to plant more of them because they're not as wide, but they're a lot more upright and they have one strong central leader, but the branches are much smaller. You could go in there with your dog and your dog could take a couple of branches back, and you could take a couple of branches back on your daily walk just to maintain. So you can replace those older genetics with the newer genetics. You also have to think too about, there are some self-pruning situations. If you have a pine that's growing, it may have grown without any branching in certain spots, and if you plant another pine next to it, it doesn't mean it's not going to necessarily fill in the same way, or that old one won't branch out in those places anymore. It's already self-pruned in those areas. It's much less likely to grow the branches. So those are some considerations to think about. There's also certain species that we see over and over again. Do some research. There's too many species to really list here, but do some research. Know the trees that are on your property. Know what you really could get. Like, is that where you want to be in terms of lifespan? What is the prime life of your shelter belt for you? If it's already established, then you might want it to last for indefinitely. So how are you going to renew it at a regular basis? Are you going to do that every 5 years, a little bit every year? Like, where's your workload? Do you have some crop rotation that allows you to work on it once every 5 years really well, and that's the time to do it? Then do it. Then do that. But if you don't do a needs assessment, if you don't know what you're working with, you don't have as many choices, and you're going to get what you get, and you can't get upset. I think we all are aware that the climate is changing, that the years of a lot of extra deluge and extra water have given way to a lot of dry years. So that might change the needs of your shelter belt. If your shelter belt planted a lot of water-loving species, and poplars and willows are water-loving species, and so is red-nose your dogwood, those might not be the best choices today. And as the climate changes, your level of maintenance might go up if you're not choosing the appropriate species. So as the climate changes and as the level of moisture in your area changes, you need to adapt to that. Additionally, you might find that with extra rainfall or more extreme weather events where there's extra rainfall or prolonged periods of dry and sunlight and heat, you might want to find species that adapt to that well and can soak up water when it comes or can survive the drought type periods.